Welcome to the Astrology Interview. And I'm so thrilled to be with my dear friend and colleague, Felicity Warner. And Felicity, as I'm sure many of you know, is the founder of Soul Midwives, which is basically training people in the holistic care of the dying. Now, Felicity, you've been at this for a very long time.
I really have been at it for a very long time. So I suppose with the hat on, probably around 35 years. But before that, I think I probably started when I was about 6. That was my first sort of memory.
Now, you've also got a real interest in astrology too, haven't you? And this is where you and I really meet because of my interest in death and dying and my passion for astrology. So we're just going to talk initially about the whole concept of psychopomps and explain what that means astrologically, as well through the work that you do. And we're also going to look at, have you got what it takes to work with the dying in your chart, in your astrological chart? How does that show up in your astrological chart? Because it will. So let's start with the psychopomps. How do you interpret psychopomps?
Right. Well, for me, it connects with an ancient practice, or ancient in as much as it's been recorded for absolutely millennium, of somebody who conducts the souls of others. So my meaning of that is that you literally hold somebody by the hand, you walk them across that sacred threshold that divides this world to the next, and you hold space and honor that experience while you do it.
Yes. So on the astrological archetypal level, the psychopomp who helps people across and takes them to the river Styx is, of course, Mercury.
Yes.
So what Mercury does, he offers the departed soul to the river Styx, and where the person forgets their life and they go into the other world, forgetting everything that they've done in this life, and that's all to do with their karma and the story of their life and where they're going next. And I'm really interested in the whole concept of being the messenger. And I just wondered if being interested in astrology, whether you want to add anything to that.
Well, I think it's very interesting because there are several archetypes that come up as psychopomps. I mean, you've mentioned Mercury, Hermes, who also has an association with the trickster energy, which is quite interesting.
Yes.
There are also, we can think of, there are many others, I mean, including the Northern Lights. I mean, the Inuits believe that the Northern Lights are there to light the way across the sacred threshold. And even in our Western culture, we have Peter Pan, who looked after the lost boys, and he took them across.
Well, he was very mercurial, wasn't he? That's the whole thing with Peter Pan.
He was very mercurial, yes. And I would say, really, with one of the characteristics of being a psychopomp is that you have one foot constantly in both worlds. And so I really resonate with that because I think I have felt like that all my life. So there we are. I didn't realise it, obviously, when I was little, but I've always felt as if I belong in two places.
That's it. I'm going to bring in Pluto here, obviously. He takes people into the underworld. So there is a sense of destruction and death, and then he brings them out. There is a sort of sense of rebirth. Now, I think when I was doing my end-of-life research project with Peter Fenwick, it became quite obvious that the dying process was a process. It wasn't a vent. People were having profound experiences, for instance, deathbed visions and things like that of people that they love who have come to collect them. And I think that's very sort of Pluto taking us into the dying process, but the dying process being a form of transformation, that people went beyond there was a sense of consciousness continuing. And I just wondered if
Yes.
you wanted to say anything about that.
Yes. Oh, Sue, absolutely. I mean, that really underpins the whole ethos of soul midwifery in terms of our spiritual support of people who are going through the dying process. And process is such a key word there. It is not an event. And it's not even when we have a quick death, such as, a cardiac arrest, something like that. There actually will have been a lead up to that in terms of it being a process in our model of what we understand death to be, particularly. So it really, there is a series of almost initiations that people go through in that dying process. And I love that you mentioned the deathbed visions, because that's such an extraordinary part just towards the end of life, when people again have a foot in two worlds. They're leaving this
Yes.
world and they're just about to get into the next world. And I feel that their antennae, in a way, is expanding their bandwidth. If we're like a radio that tunes into a few stations in life, we know where we're at. But as we're dying, it's as if that expands and we are tuning into a much bigger bandwidth. And so having access to much more esoteric experience, if you like,
Yes.
as we're dying.
And the psychopomp is the person who's come to collect the dying person.
Yes.
It's the
Oh,
nurse sitting
yes.
beside the dying,
Yes.
almost passing them over, if they're present with the dying, to the energy that's come to collect them. I mean, I have
Exactly.
I have heard so many stories. I have personally, and I know you have too, to discount that this does not happen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen it so often now that I would
Yeah.
never ever doubt it. And one of the things I love, or that happens quite often with me, is I'm working with people who are still suffering with grief, and often they will tell a story that's really confused them about watching one of their loved ones having an experience like this. And they just can't place it. They can't work it out, and they keep it inside, and it's part of their sort of story, their secret story. But when they're able to share it, it's as if, wow, they suddenly realize lots of other people have these experiences as well, and that actually that's really good, and it really helps them in their grieving journey.
Yeah, so the sort of the whole concept of the astrological concept of psychopomps with the messenger, which is Mercury, it manifests this
Yes,
this sort of being taken across manifests as we die.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, it does. And when I'm in that role, sitting with someone who is dying, I become part of that energy that is taking them across. So I'm also in that role myself. I cross that sacred threshold myself.
and it is this sense of having one foot in reality. That's the dying process for me. That's what I came to understand through the research, was that there is, it's almost like we're being taught to die, and we take time to die, and the psychopomp that's there, whether it's an angel, whether it's a child. People talked about listening to children turning up. The psychopomps were also perhaps the family dog,
Oh
that
yes,
the
absolutely.
child coming
Yes,
back, the
yes.
butterfly arriving in the room, all of that. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It
And I
really
don't
is
think we talk enough
fascinating.
about psychopomps.
We don't. And I mean, even the word frightens a lot of people because it sounds
Yeah.
a bit like sort of psycho of some kind.
Yes.
People say, "Oh, I don't think I like that." But when you actually explain it, they're with you and they get it. But yes, we don't talk about it enough.
It's the transition. The psychobomb is the messenger of transition, the helper at the end of life, the helper through those difficult times. Also, I think they're also for the living as well, because in my experience, when I've been through very difficult times, there's always been and somebody's turned up in my life to help me through the ending that I'm experiencing. And you know what? Might never see them again, but it's that act of kindness or that smile in the street. I think we have to expand our understanding what a psychopomp is. They're our guardian angels in that moment.
Yes.
And I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I mean, these random acts of kindness at exactly the moment you need them.
Yes.
We speak of a divine intelligence, of a frequency that is accessible to us in these moments.
Yes.
And you know, even it's not even a person sometimes. Sometimes you turn the radio on and exactly that right song will come on with the right words to take you through that
Yes.
moment. So I think of it as a bandwidth, as a frequency, and it might include people, or it might include animals, or
Yes.
music, or whatever.
And
Yes.
I think when we have those amazing synchronicities, it kind of reconnects us to the reality that we are intrinsically connected to an intelligent, vibrant universe, which is communicating with us.
Yes.
And if
Big
that
time.
is so, of course it's going to be communicating with us at the end of life and how we die.
Yes,
Bound to be.
absolutely. I think that's brilliantly put, Sue. And I think if that was one takeaway that we could give people from this
Yes.
conversation, what a brilliant one that is, because you're right. This intelligent universe that we're a part of, it is communicating with us the whole time. And I think when we're in the dying process, we are very much more sensitive to picking up that intelligence and those messages. So absolutely, I think it's huge. Yeah.
The veil thins, and the psychopomp has a very strong role to play. So, how do we know whether we've got what it takes to become a psychopomp for someone? How do we know what it takes to work with the dying? And we're going to look at astrology here. So, how would you what qualities would you say that we need to work with the dying, to be really present, to be open to the fact that odd things happen in the dying process? You know, you've got to put the
Absolutely.
rational brain aside. So what do you think?
I think to be calm, to be centered, obviously to be compassionate, to be able to offer unconditional love with no judgment is incredibly important. So to become a neutral vessel of love and compassion is incredibly important. And and to have resilience, as you were just saying,
Yes,
in the
yes,
face of chaos, because
yes,
all sorts of things can happen that can throw you off balance. So
yes.
to have some emotional resilience, I think, and energetic resilience, I think is really important.
So for me, when I've been looking at people's charts and seeing clients' charts and talking to people that are really open to working with the dying, I was just working with somebody just the other day, and for her, she is a mover and shaker in New Zealand on the whole dying front, and she has Pluto on her ascendant. So that's interesting.
Yes.
And Pluto is anybody who doesn't understand the archetype of Pluto. Pluto is many things, but he is the lord of death and dying, of the of taking us into the underworld, of the transition. So anyone who's got Pluto on the ascendant will most likely have experiences of death and dying, and because automatically they may be also have a very deep understanding about trauma and be drawn to the undercurrent of the human condition. They won't be frightened to go in deep. People with Scorpio on the ascendant, they're willing to get in there and get down and dirty with people. So they're usually very interested in psychology. So I found that interesting. And I think also that Pluto in the 12th house, because the 12th house is the unconscious. And again, Pluto in the 12th house wants to bring everything underneath up into the conscious world. So I think Pluto plays hugely important role. What would you say?
I'm not as skilled in astrology as you, Sue, but yes, I think you're absolutely right. And in my own chart, I think
I'm going to share.
Pluto.
You're okay with sharing your chart?
Yes, absolutely,
Let's
do.
just do your chart here. Can we all see that? Right. Let me just move this here. Put this us down here. So this is Felicity's chart, and guess what? She's got Pluto in the 12th.
Surprise, surprise.
Guess what? Also, Felicity, you've got a new moon in Pisces, and it's right opposite Pluto here. So it's very interesting that you were so interested in a child in the whole concept of death and dying.
Amazing.
Mm. Yeah. And also you have Virgo on your ascendant. Now Virgo is it's the healer. So there is a organic I would say an organic process for you to want to enter into health and well-being, being interested in that. And of course your ruler is in Mercury, and that's in fiery old Aries. It wants to go out into the world and do something with that. I'm not going to go into massive detail here, but it's very interesting that you have that, and you've got Saturn in Capricorn in the 4th house, and the 4th house is all about endings. And Saturn is also regarded as a planet of endings, aging. I want to build something. I want to build something about my understanding about endings. Saturn, 4th house. So I would say anyone with a Saturn in the 4th house may have what it takes. Pluto, absolutely. I'm going to use your chart. Pluto up here in the 10th house. Pluto would want to have a career in some form of understanding the depth of psychology.
Wow.
So there's something there as well. Anything to do with Pluto above in the 12th, the 10th, the 4th. Pluto in the 4th could mean a very difficult childhood, but because of that, you're wanting to understand the depth of the human condition again. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm sure other people will spot things in the chart, but I was really interested in that, the fact you have Pluto in the 12th for you. And how would you, knowing a little bit about astrology, how would you say that your Pluto in the 12th works out?
Well, I all my life have been very conscious of the things that other people can't see. So I suppose that really links in with that. I've been always very aware of atmospheres. And you know, as a child, I'd walk into a house and think, "Oh, I can't bear this. I have to go out again." Or I'd be introduced to a lovely person, and I'd take one look and I'd know they weren't lovely, really. That there was something dark and hidden there that wasn't of the light. So yeah, I think that says a lot about my psyche, the fact that we have Pluto where it is. It's extraordinary, extraordinarily accurate. Everything you've described there is very much linked with who
And
I am.
being opposite your new moon, I found that really interesting. And Pisces is, I think a lot of people who are drawn to the dying, to working with the dying, have a strong Pisces, because Pisces is all about compassion. It's all about this sort of sense of the deep human condition, this sense of suffering, this understanding, this center suffering, and yours is opposite your Pluto, which is, you know, that brings that understanding of death and dying and of the unconscious. And it was actually your new moon is in the sixth house of work. So that's how you've expressed it.
I mean, Sue, you could not make this up.
I know,
That's what I
it's
love about this. The accuracy is phenomenal.
well, it's the potential, isn't it?
Potential. That's what
Yeah.
that's a better word. The potential for it is all there.
And I think anyone who's got a strong eighth house, because Pluto rules the eighth house. So if you have a lot of planets in eighth house, you can be very drawn to Pluto stuff, which is all about life, death, and sex. And obviously the eighth house is about other people's money as well. So it's this sort of desire to dig in deep, to find out what life is all about. And sex is all part of that. Of course it is. Life, death, and sex. What else is there to talk
What else
about?
is there? Exactly. Got it all there, haven't
Yes.
we?
So I
Well,
think that's really important. And obviously because the psychopomp is Mercury, then you may like you have your Mercury as your ruling planet. You've got a strong Mercury, the psychopomp.
and I have. And I mean, people I think very quickly. I drive people insanely mad because I think so fast, and that's very mercurial as well, isn't it?
Yes,
You know, this
absolutely.
rapidity, and of course that gives me an impatience. It's the downside of it, but I'm always quick, 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 and it's yes, it's quite very linked with Mercury. Absolutely, yes.
And for you, I mean, if we look about, you know, we're talking about how have you got what it takes to work with the dying. With you, your Mercury is your ruling planet, and it's very strong in Virgo. It is in exaltation in Virgo. So there is this sort of sense of a strong psychopomp. So again, anyone who has Virgo rising with a strong Mercury in their chart, I mean, it would depend on other things as well. Obviously, there's in astrology, you always have to look at least 3 signatures. But let's say they had, I don't know, a strong 8th house, and maybe Mercury is in the 8th house. You know, that would be a desire to dig in deep. And maybe there's another, maybe they've got a strong Pisces. So in let's say in the 10th house, and where's your Pluto? So look at all of these. Have you got what it takes to work with the dying? And always look at the 10th house, because that's the house of career. And yes, and often people who've got a strong 4th house, Pisces, has they have a desire to connect, because they're standing on the ocean of consciousness, and there can be a yearning to go home. Literally, that can often feel like that in Pisces. But if you've got a Pisces midheaven, there is this sense of wanting to create, wanting to work with this sense of suffering, of alleviating suffering of the world. Now, where do you feel that fits in around working with the dying?
Oh, hugely. For me, that resonates with the feelings of empathy that you need to have in relating to another one's pain, and their story as they're navigating through the pain. Empathy
The
is
story, yes.
huge, you know, for we can never 100% know what anyone else is going through, but I think when we have empathy, we can begin to really go slip inside underneath the skin and accompany them in some very dark places. And that again is essential for the work that we do if we're going to work at depth. And that's interesting because in soul midwifery, I think one of our strongest points is that we are not afraid to go in very deep. You know, a lot of other organizations working with dying that's all very keen on having safe boundaries. And I mean, we do have safe boundaries. You operate with that as well, with an understanding of that, but we're not frightened to go really, really deep and to take as long as that takes for the healing from that to happen. So I think that's very, very important in this work.
So that would bring in the quality of Neptune, this ability to sit, this ability to be present, the ability. So again, it may be that you've got a strong Neptune in your chart. The Neptune might be in the 8th house. It could be sitting on your MC. You might be very creative, but also able to hold a story. And
Yes.
then it's really important, you know, you need to have more significators than just one to know that you've got what it takes. But all of these signify a desire to be with the human condition at a depth.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that for me, that underpins every aspect of this work with sitting with the dying, 100%. Yeah.
And do you want to say a little bit more about telling the stories of the dying?
Oh, yes, because that's interesting as well. I mean, I came into working with the dying not from a clinical background at all. I came in because I was a journalist, and my work at the time was a health feature writer. I I sat with people and listened to their stories about how it was to be dying. And I worked with 6 women who had breast cancer, who knew they were at end of life, and they told me their deepest, darkest stories and all the secrets that came with that. So another aspect of this is secret keeping. I'm very good. You can tell me anything. I'm bomb proof.
And that's Pluto. Keeping
Ah,
secrets.
I'm a
Pluto. That's Scorpio. And actually, what we haven't talked about yet, of course, is Chiron, the wounded healer.
yeah, the wounded healer. Exactly. In fact, Sue, where does that figure in my
Well,
chart? Just for
again, oh,
interest.
hang on, I'm just going to have a quick look at your chart. Your Chiron's in the 6th house, and it's in Aquarius. So an Aquarius is all this sense of the wound of belonging. So it's actually wanting to have the experience of a sort of doing things differently. That the wound is I don't belong, but the positive side of it, I have almost like a creative genius that I can do things differently, and I have and I can create, invent. That's the higher aspect.
I love it.
Something that is of help to humanity. That's Chiron in Aquarius. Aquarius is about humanity. It's all about the people. It's all about us. How do we do it together? How do we bring ourselves together? So the fact that you've created this incredible school from nothing to share people's stories to help humanity is the higher aspect of Chiron's expression in Aquarius. So again, if you've got Chiron in Pisces, again, there is this sense of the wound is really about sort of the being lost in yourself, in this sort of sense of chaos. But if you have go to the higher aspect of Chiron in Pisces, would be incredibly understanding your own wound and taking that wound into helping other people. So for instance, you hear lots of stories about people who, let's say, their children have died. So they use that traumatic experience, the chaotic experience of grief, and they start a charity. It's got that feel.
Classic. Well, that you see, this is fascinating for me as well, because therapeutically, one of the biggest pieces of work that we do in soul midwifery is looking out and being aware of the soul wound of the person that we're working with who's dying. Because again, this goes back to death being a process. And during the process of dying, Mother Nature, call her what we like, brings up these soul wounds to the surface of the psyche for them then to be healed and released before we die.
Yes.
That is hugely important. So, a lot of my work in sitting with someone who's dying is waiting, watching, and seeing what that soul wound is going to be about. Because we all have them, however much work we've done on ourselves. And it's usually the thing we keep a bit hidden away in the
Yes.
cupboard. But the
That's
cupboard
a shame.
door will open while we're dying. And there I am, a bit like the midwife, catching it as it jumps out and then saying, okay, we will now work with the gift this brings us as well and turn this into richness for the soul to develop with. So that it's a whole part of the healing journey, looking for that wound.
So Chiron plays an essential part in the dying process.
There
It's
we
actually
are.
the release, it's releasing, isn't it? It's that
It's
sense of
releasing.
I need to
Exactly.
release that my wound, the
Yes,
wound that's kept me small.
yeah. Whoa. And don't we have them, all of us?
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. So where we're going with this is, if you're interested in working with a dying, or you feel you've got what it takes, just check in your chart. Look at your Pluto, look at Chiron, the wounded healer, look at the active psychopomp, which is Mercury. Do you have a strong Mercury in your chart? What's it doing in your chart? And look at your 8th house. Is it a strong 8th house? That's more than likely you'll be drawn to looking at the psychology of human nature. Do you have Scorpio rising? If you do, automatically you're signed up. You're signed up to look at the darker sides of life, and death is regarded as that. Do you have a Scorpio or Pluto on your midheaven? How is that playing out for you? Are you drawn to working with psychology? Are you automatically drawn to being interested in death and dying? Have you got Pisces on your 10th house? Pisces is about compassion. Is it on your 4th house? Standing on the oceans of consciousness. Do you have Pluto, like you do, in the 12th house? So all of these are signatures, they're possibilities. And it's and if you don't know yourself, chat to somebody who who can help you understand that. Or if you have a calling to go and do it, have your chart checked out.
Absolutely. I mean, what a wonderful way it would be if people want to become full-time soul midwives, and more people are hearing that call to be
Yeah.
able to have their chart looked at by somebody like you, Sue, would be such an amazing asset to them. I mean,
Well,
what?
any astrologer. I
Yes.
I think the reason why this is so many people are being called at the moment to do this work is because Neptune is at the moment traveling through Pisces. Neptune,
Oh,
yeah, Neptune's in its own water sign, Pisces. It's the modern ruler of Pisces. So and Neptune is all about, the veil. The veil is thin with Neptune. You either go into addictions and want to escape, or you're really opening up to the other dimension, to the collective, to what you interpret God to be, what is beyond the veil. And I think the other really interesting thing around this is that Saturn is now in Pisces too, and it's grounding it. It wants to make Pisces real. Pisces is
so
already here.
important. We can be all over the place as
Yes,
Pisceans, absolutely.
yes,
But to be a grounded Piscean, to be able to use the gifts of Pisces, the
yes.
sensitivities and the dreaminess and the knowingness on a heart level, that's fantastic that Saturn is grounding that then. How long is that lasting for? Is this a
Oh,
long
it's
term?
it's they're going to come together in early 2026, but they're in the same. So that Saturn is working its way to joining up with Neptune. It's going to take a while, but they're in the same sign together. So we've got dreamy Pisces doing the call.
Yes. The sirens call.
Sirens call, let's go and, let's open our hearts in compassion. And Saturn coming up behind going, let's make this real. So I'm not surprised lots of people are being drawn into wanting to explore what it's like to work with the dying.
That so explains this zeitgeist kind of moment that is really materializing. I've been doing this work for a long time, and there have always been people drawn to it, but at the moment, so many more people are really feeling they want to do this. So that really, really helps. That's very interesting.
Isn't that interesting? I've never thought of this before. We've had this conversation, and of course, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So clever. I love it.
Yes, and I wonder why. I can understand astrologically now, but I'm wondering about this desire to work with the dying. Why do people tell you, I want to work with the dying?
Sometimes they don't use that language. Sometimes it's more of a nebulous feeling that they want to be doing something of the heart-based work, compassionate work. But my sense is that it's a reflection, it's a microcosm of the macrocosm. And the macrocosm is all about massive transition at the moment. So we're looking at a massive transition on a planetary level, of consciousness.
Yeah.
And this is how it's funneling down into the human condition, and literally the person on the street feeling they want to be out working in their own neighborhoods and communities with
Yes.
people.
And
Let it
that's
filter
that's
down.
Pluto moving, just about to move back into Aquarius for the next 20 years. So out of the restriction of the earth-based Capricorn into Aquarius, which is about humanity. It is about the people. It's about ground up. It's not about the government down. It's all about, how do we do this differently? How do we break the taboos? How do we come out and do, and how do we create community? Well, in the old days, when people are dying, they had community about them.
Oh, they did. And
And
people died at home and everyone knew what to do, and it
absolutely,
was normal, and there
yes,
was a lot less fear around it because people knew what it looked like, they knew what it sounded like, they knew what it smelt like. And sadly, in the last 60, 70 years, that's been taken away from us. And I think there is a big groundswell now coming in. People want to reclaim those skills of knowing how to vigil their loved ones.
which
And
builds community.
exactly, exactly. And
Doesn't
COVID was the absolute polarization of that. People didn't realize before how important it was that we sit with our loved ones who are dying. The thought of people being behind hospital doors and no one could visit them completely
changed everything.
freaked people out. It was so upsetting. So there's been an interesting kind of
Yes.
movement towards returning to how we were. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So there is this assisted dying process. It's come back up again.
Yes, it
And
has.
I think that's Saturn in Pisces.
Ah,
I do.
yes, I hadn't
Yeah.
made that connection at all, but
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Yes.
Mm.
Felicitys, anything else that you'd like to say about, have you got what it takes to work with the dying?
Well, I believe that everybody has got what it takes to sit with the dying, and I champion that, really, that this is not exclusive work for people who've been medically trained, or even if they're psychotherapists or complementary therapists. I think this is the work that we all know how to do. And really, a lot of my work is about reminding people of skills that they inherently have, and to
Yes.
follow their DNA wisdom, to follow their hearts, and to know that they can't really get it wrong if they work with their heart energy and they work with love. They
Yeah.
are just going to be in the right place to do the right thing for their loved ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
And check out on your chart whether if you have the calling, have a look in your chart and see if you're having that call and you think, well, I don't know, I'm not sure. If it's there in your chart, it's there in your chart.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.